Hey everyone, Arthur from Rive here. Today I'm going to show you how you can get started with our React runtime. So what I've specifically got planned is we're going to take this hamburger menu animation, which has a simple state machine. It's got a single input called switch, and we can click here and we can transition between these two different states. And what I want to do is I want to build a React component where when I actually click on that hamburger menu, it's going to transition between those two different states. Now, we actually did a video on how to build this animation in the editor quite recently, so I'll link that below in the description if you want to follow along and see how we actually built this. I'm going to assume that you already have a bit of knowledge of React, specifically some of the basic concepts such as components, state, handling events, plus some more advanced concepts such as hooks, and you've got a bit of familiarity with the Create React app tool, which is what we're going to be using to run through this today. Cool, so let's jump into it and get started. Great, so I've got a fresh Create React app project set up here. As you can see, it's basically as it comes installed. So let's just check out the code. And let's clear all this up just to basically create a blank canvas for us. So let's get rid of this class name. We're going to get rid of these two imports as well. Cool, so as you can see, it's now completely blank. So the first thing we need to do if we're going to be using our React runtime is to install our React runtime. So if we go to our GitHub page here, we can see the instructions for installing are simply to npm install the Rive React package. So let's go ahead and do that. While that's installing, let's go ahead and show you how you can actually play like a really simple animation in your app. Let's say that you've got something, you've just got a single animation, maybe it's a looping animation, and you just want to play it in the background. No interactivity or anything fancy like that. So what we can do is we can import Rive from Rive React. And this Rive import is essentially just a component. And there's a prop that we need to give it, which is our source. And this is effectively going to point to our Rive file asset. So let's go ahead and put that into the app. So if we go to the community page here, we can see that there's a download button. So I'm just going to download that, and that's just downloaded that Rive file to my computer. So what I'll do is I will drag that into the source folder here, and that's now available for us to use. So you can see what's kind of cool is that actually has popped up here in my window. I'm using Visual Studio Code. There's a really cool extension for Visual Studio Code if you're using it too, called VS Code Rive Viewer. And as you can see, if you have this installed, it basically lets you look at and view Rive files in VS Code. You can actually interact with them as well. So you can see I can just click the fire state and it's actually transitioning between the state machines. It's got a list of all the different animations, so I can see, just have to stop that, and I can actually play through the different animations that are available to me. So that's pretty cool. I'd recommend giving that an install if you're using VS Code. It's made by a user called Runba. So shout out to them for building that. Let's have a quick talk about Rive files, because I find that this can confuse some people sometimes. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename it just to hamburger time, just to make it slightly easier to work with. So the best way to think about Rive files is to treat these the same way that you would any other asset within your web app. For example, images, fonts, audio maybe. Essentially you need to either host these publicly or host them somewhere so that you can pull them into your app, or bundle them up. So for example, if we're going to be using a Create Rive app, we can actually bundle them up into the app specifically. So we leave it in our source folder like this, and we just import hamburger time from hamburger time. .rive. And if we just pass this import into our source file here, like so, and we check out our app, we can see that this is now just loaded in our Rive file. So that's one way that we can import this. Another way is that we could actually put this Rive file into our public directory. And instead of importing it like this, we can just point our source to that path within our public directory. So that's hamburger time dot rb. And you can see that's still loading in as before. That might be basic to some of you guys. I know it just causes confusion for some people, so I just wanted to go over that there. Great, so we're now pointing to that source. And as we can see, that's now playing here. But there's not really much happening. It's not very exciting. It's just kind of showing our hamburger menu. When I click on it, nothing happens. Yeah. So let's add an animation so that it's actually going to play. So if I add an animation prop here, and I give it the name of one of these animations, so we can see we've got hamburger to X. Now, every single time that I start the app, it's going to play that animation. So like I said, that's a really simple way. If you just want to get started, you just want to have a simple animation playing, there's a way for you to do it. But let's say you want to have something a bit more advanced. You want to have a bit more interactivity. Let's say instead of playing this animation every single time the app is refreshed or the page is refreshed, let's say when I mouse over the animation, we're going to play the, when I mouse over the hamburger menu, we're going to play the animation instead. So for that, we're going to need our hook. So I'm going to import use Rive here. And we're going to set up the hook. So this will return a few things. The first thing it's going to return is a Rive object. And this is what allows us to do the different interactivity with the Rive animation. And then the second thing is our Rive component. And then we have use Rive. So this takes a number of different inputs, but the ones that we care about the most right now are the source, which is going to be the same as what we have down here. We want to switch it to autoplay equals to true. And we want to put the animation to be hamburger to X. And then we're going to replace this component down here with our new Rive component. Doesn't like that. Cool. So as you can see, we basically got exactly what we had before. But what we said we wanted to do is that when we mouse over this component, we're going to play that animation instead. So let's not autoplay. We're going to turn autoplay to false. And then on the Rive component itself, let's just call the event handler on mouse over. And when we mouse over, we're going to call rive.play. So you can see here our Rive file is not going to autoplay, and it will only start playing when we actually mouse over. So let's have a quick look at that. So you can see it's still our hamburger menu. I've now moused over it, and it's now changed. But it's not going to change back. And for that, we're going to need to hook up our state machine. Cool, so let's see how we can do that. For our state machine, the first thing we need to do is we're going to need to have autoplay equal to true. And we're going to need to also pass the state machine name in here. So you can see if I click back onto the Rive file here, I can find the name of the state machine by looking at the names of the different state machines down here. But let's say that you're not using VS Code or you don't want to install this extension for whatever reason. I'm going to show you another handy little way that you can get the names of these things in the files. So this Rive object here actually has something called contents. And what we can do is we can just log that contents, and we're basically similar to how we see a list of the different artboards, animations, state machines. We're going to see that the same in our console terminal. One thing to note though, we do just need to make sure that that Rive object has been initialized. So this hook will return Rive as null until the Rive file has actually been loaded. So basically, once it's loaded, it's going to cause this component to re-render, and then that Rive object will come back as not null. So do just make sure that you put in that check there to make sure it's null before you print this out. Cool, so let's open up our console window. And we can see here we've got this object here. We can see the different artboards. Inside the artboards, we can see the different animations available to us, the different state machines, the different inputs for those state machines. So that's a really handy way if you're using a Rive file that you're not familiar with, you don't know what the name of the inputs, the name of the animations, you can basically click through and you can find out what it's are. So we can see the name of the state machine we want is called basic state machine. So let's set that there. Cool. We can remove this, and we can remove our mouse over handler as well. So let's play that and see what we've got. And we have this, again, basic animation, no interactivity, it's just our hamburger menu. So let's hook up that input. So I need to import the hook called useStateMachineInput. And that's going to return a input object. I'm just going to call this onClickInput. And now this hook takes 3 different parameters. The first parameter it takes is the Rive object. The second parameter it takes is the name of the state machine. So in this case, it's basic state machine. Let's create a constant here, just to share between. These 2 hooks. And then the final parameter is the name of the input. So if we go back here, we can see that we have the state machine, basic state machine, and it's got this input called switch. So we just need to set the name of our input in here. Or let's even create a constant for that as well. Input name equals switch. Great. So we have this input object, and what we said we wanted to do is we wanted to trigger that when we actually click on the component. So we have our onClick handler, and we're going to call the fire function. So this particular input on the state machine is what we call a trigger input, and that basically means that we're going to transition a state whenever we call the trigger function. In this case, with this runtime, we're going to be calling the function called fire. So the other types of inputs you can have on state machines are numbers and booleans. And the way that you trigger those is slightly different. So instead of calling fire, what you would do is you would have value equal to a number if it's a number input, or to a boolean if it's a boolean input. But for this case, we've got a trigger input, so we need to call fire. Great, that should be everything that we need. So let's reload our app. And you can see when I just click on it, it's now transitioning between the 2 states. That's pretty cool. So we said that what we wanted to do is actually build a component. So let's refactor this code to be more of a component and to be slightly more reusable. So let's create a new file. We'll call it Rive Hamburger. And we'll start to build up our component. Rive Hamburger. And we can essentially just copy everything that we've already done here into this new component and our inputs as well. And then we'll just remove the surrounding div. We don't really need that anymore. Cool. And then in our app here, we can remove all this code. We're going to import Rive Hamburger from Rive Hamburger, and we're going to set our component up here. Great. That seems to be complaining. I think I just need to restart our Create React app. Doesn't seem to have found the file. Yeah, and now it's working. Great, and we can see it still works when we click into it. Cool. So one last thing I want to cover is the sizing of this component. So as you can see, this hamburger menu is probably a little bit too big for what we want a traditional hamburger menu to be. And there's a few different ways that we can control the size. So the first thing that we can do is we can go into our Rive Hamburger component, and onto this Rive component, we can actually just attach a style that will basically give it the size straight away. So if I just do style equals height, I don't know, let's have a really big component. So 500 pixels, width 500 pixels as well. So you can see now I've got this massive hamburger menu that I can click on, which is kind of cool. Just some own personal advice, I wouldn't actually recommend attaching styles directly to the Rive component itself. So this component will fit to whatever the size of the outer, its parent element is. So rather than adding them directly to this component, what I like to do is we've got this parent div here, is attach it to this div. So let's even change it to something a little bit bigger, just so you can see it changing size. So now it's even bigger hamburger menu. So that's the way that I like to control these components when I'm building them myself, is to use that parent div to basically control the size of them. However, another way that I do also recommend is just to use CSS and just to use classes. Let's say I've got my Rive hamburger. I'm going to add a prop called class name. And I'm going to pass this class name directly to my Rive component here. Then I can do class name. We can give it a name. Let's just say big. And I'll create a second Rive hamburger and we'll call it small. So let's create a CSS file. So new file Rive hamburger .css. Cool, and we have a class called big, which has a width, let's say 500 pixels, and then a height the same. And we also have our small class, and we'll go 100 pixels. Still quite big, but I think that's okay for now. And then we just need to make sure that we import our CSS file here. Cool, and as you can see, we've got our huge Rive hamburger, and then we've got our nice small one below it. So those are two ways that I recommend controlling the size of your components in React. That's it. Thanks very much. I hope that was helpful. If you do have any comments, please leave them below in the comment section. Any other things that you want us to go over, anything more specific with the React runtime, or any of the other platforms that we have runtimes available for, let us know in the comments if you want us to do videos on those. Otherwise, thanks and see you guys again.